must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I am Ricky Vans, your host, and today we got Jen Briney from Congressional Dish podcast. She's the creator and host of the show, and she's a really smart and intelligent woman who did something pretty crazy. She read every single bill that passed the House for 2 years, and her podcast, she really breaks down bills. She lets you know where the money's being spent and all the ridiculous things. She sees in bills, and she does all the hard work and then shares all the really important points with her listeners and breaks it down in a way that even people who aren't really interested, or don't think you're interested in what's in a bill can get interested in. Because really, once you find out where your money's being spent and the loopholes and just all the ridiculous bills that there are out there, I think you start caring. And she made a really good point on the podcast about the difference between politics and government, which I think is a really good point, because I think that her podcast isn't about politics, it's about government. It's about where we're spending our money, and we really should focus on that and pay attention to that, because like I said on the podcast, there's plenty of people that are living paycheck to paycheck that if they lost their job, they'd lose their house, and yet, they're just recklessly spending money here and there and subsidies for this company and that company. So, and she breaks down the Monsanto Protection Act, the Stock Act, just so many different bills that just are important and affect our lives and affect where our dollars go, but yet we might not know a lot about, bills that have to do with fracking, bills that have to do with defense spending, just tons of stuff. So it's really, really interesting. So check that out. She called in using video, and just like all our shows where the guest calls in using video on our YouTube channel, you'll see a side-by-side video version of our podcast where you can actually see me and the guest talk. So definitely check that out, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, find us on Stitcher, whatever podcast app or website you use to listen to this show. Definitely just subscribe and rate us and share it and all that stuff. I think that goes a long way. I think people do it with Facebook, they do it with Twitter, just a simple thing of retweeting or sharing something that you find interesting. If it's a podcast, if it's an article, documentary, good music, whatever it is, I just think it's a small little deed. It takes very little effort, and you can expose some of your friends or followers to some cool new stuff. So it's a great way. I guess it's the internet version of word of mouth. Back in the day, we used to say word of mouth was the best thing, because if somebody told you verbally about something, then it's almost like, well, if he likes it, it must be worth looking into. And I think if somebody retweets something that you're a fan of or shares something that you're a friend with on Facebook, I think it's more likely you're going to check it out than possibly just seeing an ad somewhere or something like that. So definitely do that. It's a small deed, and it helps us podcasters out a lot. So also remember, if you want to help the podcast, you can always download the Theory 6 Music Project. You can get the music everywhere. You can find MP3 downloads. The music is all the music you hear during the podcast, before and after, and in between sometimes. And it's you're going to hear the mono version of the songs during the podcast. But if you want to get the high quality stereo version of the podcast music, you can just find Theory 6 everywhere where you can find music. And also in the show details on our YouTube channel always has the links to the music and my guests' website and their Twitter account and Facebook and all that stuff. So you can always go to our YouTube channel, and in the show descriptions I have easy links to all that stuff where you can find the guest's website and the guest's Twitter account and Facebook and all that stuff, just in case we're a little lazy and don't feel like searching around for it. So I know sometimes we just want to the path of less resistance and just the easy way of doing things. So that's a great little way of just helping out. So I think that's it for now. Thanks again, guys, everybody who's been listening. I truly, truly appreciate it. It's awesome to see the hiatus I go on every once in a while, where it might be a week or two where I don't put out a podcast, and just consistently downloads and stuff like that. And I appreciate everybody who has said very kind words to me, everybody who runs into me somewhere and tells me about this podcast, or has emailed me or tweeted me or whatever, wrote me on Facebook and just told me about how much they like the show and how much they appreciate it. And I think that, it's things like that that really keep us going. Of course, we do this because we enjoy it and we love it. And I think it's important to enjoy and love doing this, because it's really the sole motivation to continue doing this, and the most important motivation. But it's also nice to know people are listening and people are enjoying it, and you're touching people's lives. And I think that's it for now. I think I already ranted long enough, so I'll get right to the show, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. Up, Jen. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you just fine, I think.
All right. Awesome.
Thanks for being with me.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just shut down everything so people stop tweeting me.
Yeah, I saw you got in a little tweet debate with a dude.
That guy, that is not how I want to wake up.
Well, it's so hard, because it's like sometimes you hear people say such ridiculous things, it's hard to ignore it and not get involved. And then it's like, once you do get involved, you're like, I just wasted so many hours of my life debating a dude that I'm never going to get through to in the first place.
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm trying to be nice to people, because that's exactly the type of person I want to talk to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. So I just gave up, obviously. Now I'm avoiding Twitter so he doesn't think that I'm actually paying attention to it.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. I mean, there's definitely people that you talk to and you're just like, this is way too much work. I'm never going to get through this person. But it's hard, because people like you and I who are passionate about issues, and you want to hope that you can shine a little light on their perspective and hopefully get through to them. But it's so hard. And I mean, sometimes I do believe that you don't think you got through to them, because in a debate, most people will never admit. I always use the example of when you get the religious person against atheists, they debate and never one of them ever admit when the other one makes a point. But you hope in the real world that eventually, maybe they'll look back and be like, okay, maybe Jen made a point when she said that. They'll never admit it to you, but maybe you did maybe plant the seed of doubt. Maybe they do rethink their position, but maybe that's just wishful thinking.
It's happened before. There's this one guy, Shane. I actually remember his name. I went back and forth with him for days about all kinds of stuff. He's one of those hardcore conservatives, believes all the crap from Texas, the whole thing. And we've actually kept up a pretty good friendly Twitter relationship now for 2 years. And then when I was doing the AMA and he saw it, he sent me a message and he was like, love what you do, disagree with almost everything you say, but I listened to the podcast, and he's actually really supportive. So it's by being nice to these people, it's actually worked before. And this guy, I'm not usually when people are rude and mean, I just block them and be done. But this guy's walking the tightrope. He's actually talking about substance. So I don't know. I might come back to him later tonight, but I just had to walk away. He really pissed me off this morning. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was the one that I tweeted. I think I saw it and I had to get involved. I had to say something. But
yeah, thank you for doing that. Someone had my back.
Well, it's ridiculous how. Well, one thing that drives me crazy is when people start using words like conspiracy or conspiratorial or whatever, because it's and then he talked about history, and it's if you look at history's full of conspiracies, and and you look at, the fact that we've gotten involved in so many countries throughout history, and they're what's going on politically in countries, and it's amazing when you see anybody who has read any history to say that, yo, that's absurd for us to get involved in Ukraine or us to have any hand in what's going on there. I mean, you look at what happened with the Iran, you look at, in Guatemala, Chile. I mean, there's been just endless examples of it. So, I mean, when people say stuff like that, it's like, yeah, I mean, that's why I always think history is a great way of getting people on board on things that are going on now, because a lot of times when you talk about things that are going on now, corruption or whatever, and maybe sometimes things seem hard to believe, but it seems like people have a better chance of accepting that there is fuckery when you talk about historical events. When you talk about Iran Contras, you talk about things that we kind of all just agree has happened and there was something corrupt going on, and then it's like, okay, well, we start there, and then it's like, once you realize that there are corrupt people and they do make corrupt decisions, and human life and all this other stuff doesn't really mean much, it's just all about money and power, then once you bring it back to now, it's like, well, what makes you think that stopped and that ended? And I think it's one of those things where we have to put that in perspective, where people just have to realize that shit hasn't stopped. And just like people in that moment in time believe that the bullshit that there was, being fed to them then, we're doing the same thing. And then we're going to look back and say that, oh shit, yeah, they lied to us about that. I mean, most recently, the Iraq war, you look at that, like, in that moment in time, there's a lot of people who believed the weapons of mass destruction bullshit. And then, like, now looking back, most of us look back as, oh, it was a fuck up. Same thing with Vietnam. I'm sure even though there's a lot of protests, there were people who believe that Vietnam, we have to get involved or whatever. And now looking back, we agree that, but that's what sucks, is that there's too many people who don't realize it's happening when it's happening, and only afterwards. And then afterwards it's too late because people already benefited.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what's happening with Ukraine. And that's why it's kind of frustrating, because he's like, how do you know that we were involved? And it's like, well, I mean, the CIA report hasn't come out yet, but it did with 1953, and it's going to come out here. I mean, this one just seems pretty obvious to me. But you don't have the proof until years later. The closest thing I have is that Victoria Nuland clip that I played on the show. But other than that, you just have to look at these patterns, just like you were saying, and just be like, oh, this fits the pattern perfectly. So,
I think that's the key, is just like, look at the pattern. And obviously, a lot of times in the moment you don't have the proof. But I mean, I always use the example too of, like, okay, if you dating somebody and they cheat on you over and over again, every time they say, I didn't do it this time, of course you're going to second guess them. Why don't we do that with our government? Why don't we do it with corporations? Why don't, it's like, they've lied to us over and over again. Why are we just going to, believe it? And we should do the opposite, not believe it until, guilty until proven innocent, not innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, especially when it's our government. Like, I'm really hard on our government because it's ours. Like, that's the only one we can control, and it's in our name, and it's with my money, Like,
well, that's what I love about what you're doing, because one thing I always talk about with my friends and stuff is the idea of how, anytime there's a vote for more taxes or whatever, like, and I'm just like, this is so fucking insane. Because I'm like, if you look at how much reckless spending we do, like, don't ever believe a politician when they tell you, oh, if we just raise taxes a little bit, or the income tax or the sales tax or whatever, oh, we can get us out of debt and blah. I'm like, they've been saying this for centuries, and we continuously just create more debt. And you have to look at it as, it's not their money, one, and then two, when they're out of office, it's somebody else's problem. So it's unfortunately, when money gets tight for the average person, we have to cut corners places. We have to balance our budget, but they don't have to balance a budget. They can just cry about needing more money, then they get more money, and then that's it. So I just think that I tell people, I'm like, I don't care what political side you're on, if you're a liberal, conservative, whatever, independent, just don't ever vote for more taxes, because they're both responsible for spending money recklessly. I mean, the money we spend on defense is absolutely insane. I think I saw a chart once of, like, the 10 countries that spend the most on defense, and we're one, and then, like, the next 9 combined doesn't add up to ours, which is just insane, because you're talking about other world powers like China and Russia, and so we're safe. I mean, we obviously have enough money invested in defense, and so I mean, and plus most of us, there's a better chance of us dying from a peanut allergy than a terrorist attack. It's not that common, but unfortunately, when the media keeps force feeding you this ISIS talk and Ebola and all these things, we get scared, and we don't realize, like, holy shit, not too many people died of Ebola. Holy shit, ISIS killed more Muslims than they've killed Americans. So just like, it's one of those things, we don't put that in perspective. But, I guess when you control the media and you control what people see, you kind of can control what they think.
Yeah. And it's funny because we're told it's all about terrorists and Ebola and it's all to keep us safe and all this bullshit. But I just finished this book, The Pentagon's New Map. And I hate this guy. He was so arrogant and so awful. But like, I found out that this is what our Congress is reading. And so, and on the back and on the inside cover is Representative Mac Thornberry, who's now the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. So it's like, okay, what exactly are they trying to do? And this guy is advocating that we use our military to enforce new rule sets, these economic rule sets. And he just comes out and says it. He says it's globalization and that economies that trade together don't bomb each other. But his whole thing is like he has this circle drawn around half the world. And it's basically like they either integrate or we must take them over and bomb them. And it's absolutely terrifying. He says straight up that like it needs to be preemptive, because it's dangerous for them not to be integrated in our system. And it's just like, but who is making these rules? And, I never signed up to be the world administrator of this economic system that, quite frankly, it fucks us over. So why do we think that it's going to work for the entire world? But it's like reading something like this I think is exactly what's going on. It has nothing to do with terrorists. That's just the cover, It would be one thing if they came right out and said like, okay, we're going to try and integrate the entire world economically and we're going to do it with force if necessary. And then we could have that conversation. But instead, they're just lying to us as if we're not adults and if we don't have anything to do with it. So
yeah, I mean that's a big part of it. I think the root of all evil, it's obviously something we've all heard before is money, but it's so true. I mean, I think it's the issue with politics, it's the issue with corporations. I know that people, conservatives want to blame government and then liberals want to blame corporations. I think it's just corrupt people, and I think anytime there's a chance of corrupt people getting in power and then get taking money from the wrong people, I mean, it's going to happen. I don't think it's either or. I think it's human nature. I think people are going to be corrupt. People are going to, and then what sucks is that a lot of us don't. And for listeners who don't know, you read every bill that was passed by the House for 2 years, which is fucking crazy. I mean, that's what motivated you to do that. That's when I heard that, I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, maybe they're joking. I'm like, she couldn't, not every bill, but that's insane. I mean, was the language hard to understand? Was it something that what motivated you to do that?
Well, first of all, I think it's really funny that we're on the air. I didn't realize that.
Oh, it's okay. Well, I'll tell you, this is what ends up happening. A lot of podcasts that I do, sometimes I'll bullshit with the guests for a little bit. And then what ends up happening is that I'll be like, fuck, man, I wish I recorded that, So what I started doing is I started recording the beginning of, like, once we start talking, I record. I'm like, hey, if it's a interesting conversation, I'll just post it. And that's the thing. I think people like the casual conversation of some podcasts. Like mine's very casual. Like I have people on and sometimes they're like, oh, what are we going to talk about? I'm like, I don't know. We can talk about this or that. And then like an hour later, we're like, oh shit, we didn't talk about any of this stuff we said we're going to talk about. But I think that's what people like about like alternative media. And, you have the freedom to speak your voice and be you. And, and I have the freedom to be me. And I think people, they like that, instead of like the CNN, debates where people already have their sides and they have their talking points and all that bullshit. I think that we like the fact that, plus I suck at these intro things. So I always do these intros afterwards because I'm like, I'm going to waste the guests' time, like introducing them, like just basically saying shit they already know about themselves. So I'm like, I might as well just do the intro after. And plus it always feels like I never wanted to feel like a super rehearsed podcast. Like, just a typical thing you would hear, where a Q&A type thing. So I'm just like, I wanted to be kind of casual. And I felt like anytime I kind of skipped the intro and went right to the conversation, it was more casual, instead of like, oh, here's the intro and here's my first question. And then, but my apologies. I probably should have told you.
It's totally fine. It's not the first time this has happened. So I'm always like kind of prepared for it.
Yeah. Well, I can cut out, anything if by any chance, I don't know. No. Yeah. No, it's fine. Yeah. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah. I'm pretty, there's really nothing that I say that would be like, oh my God, like don't tell people.
Well, that's the thing about being online is that when you first started doing podcasts and putting your opinions out there, was there ever a conflict, an inner conflict of, well, I don't want to be too opinionated because I might push these people off, or, was there anything like that? Or were you just like, I'm going to let it all loose, be myself, and never worried about what people are going to think about you or how people are going to take it? Because I found like early in my podcast, career or whatever you want to call it. Not career, because most of us don't make any real money doing this, but it's an awful investment. But when I first started doing podcasts, I did find myself at times second guessing the way I'm going to word something, or like, how should I express this opinion this way, that way? And then I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, just be yourself, and there's always going to be people who like and dislike what you do, and you just have to live with that. And did you ever have that inner conflict?
I have it every day. Yeah. It's the thing is though that you can't please everyone, and that's kind of like, I'm really dealing with it right now. In fact, I cried just a couple hours ago because I did a Reddit AMA. I don't know if you saw it.
I saw you post about it.
Yeah, I did it on Monday, and somehow it ended up as #1 on Reddit. And so the front of the website or something like that, right? Yeah, the front page, which is like, I didn't even know about it until hours after it was finished. It was just people were telling me, because it was my first time even using Reddit, so I didn't really know what I was doing. And the show's really like blown up in the last few days, and I'm getting a lot of feedback. And it's funny because I'll have one email being like, don't put the golf swing in it. Like, why are you censoring yourself? And then I get people being like, why are you swearing? And then like, it'll be, why just all these different emails saying the exact opposite things of each other, So it's interesting when you get feedback, and it's like, it's just proving to me more and more that I just need to do what I do, because you can't please everyone. There is no formula for making everybody happy, and especially covering politics. Not everyone is going to agree with me. But when I do the podcast, especially when I'm talking about the bills, I try really hard to keep my opinion out of it as best as possible. I try to do analysis, but not necessarily opinion, because like, people want the information and they don't really give a shit what I think about things. But more, I'm now working on these hearing episodes where I'm having conversations while watching hearings. And that's kind of where you get my opinion more, because it's a conversation with a friend, But in the actual bill episodes, I'm actually really careful about not going too far into my opinion. Now, obviously, some of them are just infuriating bills, and so my analysis, you're going to see how I feel about it, especially with the bills that have to do with poisoning the environment. I can't stand it, because like, I take my health pretty seriously. I only get one body, so if you're poisoning me, I'm going to be pretty pissed. And so my anger definitely comes through, but yeah, I'm very, very careful about it. And I'm also very careful about not diving into discussing political labels, because that's where you get into trouble. You get these people with the team mentalities that are like, if you're a progressive, well, I'm a conservative and we're enemies, and vice versa. And I don't fall in any way into either of those groups perfectly. I don't really think anybody does. What I find more often is that people mold what they think to fit the group, which is the opposite of what people should be doing. So I'm also very careful not to take the bait, I guess. This is more like in other podcasts, like if you and I were to discuss, like, as soon as people are like, well, what do you think the conservatives think? And that's where I just kind of step back, and I'm not really worried about the labels or even the parties. I have to get into party politics sometimes to explain the story. Like recently it was they almost shut down the Department of Homeland Security. So that was like a Democrat versus Republican thing, and I have to cover it that way. But if I don't have to, I don't even touch it.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I think that we just fall into that trap of, this, it's like our focus becomes arguing about ideologies and not focus on, okay, they're all corrupt, they're all taking money from Wall Street, they're all taking money from bankers, they're all like, there's not, our foreign policy doesn't change. I remember watching the documentary, The Untold History of the United States. I think that's the Oliver Stone documentary. And he starts off from like the early 1900s and just going on, and just, you look at like Truman, you look at FDR, you look at all these politicians, like they all ran on the same thing as they run on today. It's like, well, the last politician sucked, and he was a Republican or Democrat, whatever the hell he was. Well, they failed you, so vote the other party, and then they fail you, so you vote the other party. And it's like this thing where we just have awful memories, or we're so busy that we don't have time to pay attention to shit, that we just continuously get tricked into believing that, this next politician is going to be the change we're looking for, or it's going to be any different than the last politician. When you look at it historically, like, they haven't been much different, so, our foreign policy hasn't changed much, which makes you think, like, who the hell's making these decisions? And, it really just makes you feel like politics, especially the president, is just a puppet. And you look at the making sure that this empire lasts, and that's really the goal of every empire, to make sure it lasts. Obviously, a president who's only in power for 4 years, or the most 8 years, they're not going to let some guy get in the way of keeping this empire and whatever long-term goals they have. So I mean, it just it just makes you think that it's all theater.
And I feel like we really learned that lesson with Obama, especially our generation, because I remember in 2008, I worked at the polls, and I was living in Hawaii at the time. So by the time the polls closed, the election was already done pretty much. And so I walked into my house as soon as Obama was giving the acceptance speech. And I remember just sitting on the floor and feeling so relieved after the Bush administration. And then he went and did the same stuff, and I don't think that it's because he's a bad person, but I think that whatever happens when you step into that office is something most of us can never understand. It's almost like bigger. Like you said, I don't know who's pulling the strings, and that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. But yeah, and one of the other things that when you were talking about the untold history of the United States, I just wrote that down. I'm going to watch that. I feel like I was lied to my entire childhood. I looked at the same textbook that I read when I was in third grade about world history, and it was all full of the myths. I mean, it goes all the way back to Thanksgiving. We're still teaching all these little kids that are 5 and 6 years old that we were best friends with the Pilgrims and the Native Americans were best friends. They had turkey together and all this shit, and then you find out that we slaughtered them all, and that was the original thing for me that I felt was just so offensive, because my family's from Boston, so I remember going to Plymouth Plantation and being like all proud and all of it. I believed all of it. And so when you find out that they lied to you about Thanksgiving, and then you find out that we're being lied to about Iraq and everything else, it's just this, I don't know, it just has this effect of making me question every single thing I've ever been told. The problem is, it's very uncomfortable when you get to that point. That's why I get, like, this guy that I was talking to on Twitter. You don't want to believe the bad stuff about your own government. You want to believe that Putin is evil, and he is the bad guy, and everything we do is for good, and everything that's done against us has no cause, and it's all just good and evil. It's so much easier, and makes it so much easier to sleep at night if that's the world that you believe in. And once you jump over to the other side where I am, it's very uncomfortable, And I think a lot of people just don't want to go there, and so they don't.
Well, yeah. Well, it's like that saying, it's easier to be tricked than to convince somebody they've been tricked. And it's absolutely true. I mean, it's one of those things where I've talked to people about so many different things that they have had their mind made up on, and their first instinct is just to just believe that it's bullshit. Oh, it's conspiracy, it's this, whatever. And I'm just like, listen, just do your research. Like, that's the thing. Like, a lot of times I'm just like, listen, there's no reason for us to have a 1 hour debate anymore. I could send you multiple links. I could send you plenty of credible people, articles, whatever, and we can look this up, and then we can, decide if we think it's all bullshit or not. But the information's out there, and I think it is one of those things where when you start, whatever it is, like, I think we've all had one or two things that kind of open our eyes. I mean, for lack of a better term, like, started the awakening of, like, holy shit, maybe, this idea of living in a matrix isn't, not to that extreme, but to some sense, it feels like you're living in a matrix, because it's like everything that you're being told that is real isn't real, or it hasn't happened the way it happened. So your perception on what your reality is, or what historically what reality has been, isn't really true. I mean, you made a perfect point with the Native Americans, and it's like that saying, history is written by the winners. We won that battle with the Native Americans, so we get to write those history books that say, hey, we were friendly and things weren't that bad, and it's no different than if Nazi Germany won the war and they controlled the whole world. I wonder what our history books would say about Nazi Germany. It would say good things. So it's just, or even in Russia. I think I read something not too long ago about Putin kind of changing the history books and making their history look a little better, and so it's one of those things. You kind of do have that that influence on people. Even like in America, I was born in Portugal, but like, you know, being in America and like this whole, you know, pledge allegiance thing, and maybe because I was born in Europe, it seems silly to me, but I'm just like, pledge allegiance. I'm like, I'm not even an American citizen. I'm like, well, pledge allegiance to what? I'm like, I just like, I like people. I'm like, I like, you know, I don't care what color you are, what country you're from, or what flag, you know, you hang at your house. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter. I think we have to start looking at things like that, where we're just all people, and it's not, you know, and that's the thing. I think it starts young. I think at a young age, you start creating these teams with ideologies and skin colors. And I mean, you look at racism, for example, that's you know, nurtured. That's, you know, that's nurtured into somebody. Nobody gives a shit what color somebody is. I mean, when you're a kid, you'll play with a black kid, Asian kid, whatever kid, you know, you don't care. That's something that you're taught, you know. So I just think we're taught to, I mean, that's why this whole you know, nationalism, and I grew up being very proud of being from Portugal, and my parents, you know, all my ancestors being from there and being born there. And then after a while, I'm just like, this is kind of silly. I'm like, yeah, all nationalities have great things about them, and I don't want to take anything away from that, because I have a lot of friends who are from El Salvador, Estonian, and all that stuff, and I think it's awesome. It's cool to find out what they eat and what they, you know, their music, and they all have amazing things about them. And but I think when you start using that stuff to separate one another instead of bringing us together, then I think that, you know, it becomes a bad thing, and that's when nationalism becomes, you know, a plague.
Yeah, and I actually think that people are born into political parties too, because both my parents were Republican, and when they drove me to school, I went to private school, and so it was a solid half-hour drive. My mom was listening to Rush Limbaugh and Dr. Laura and all those horrible people, but I was raised to be Republican. So when I turned 18 in 2000, I voted for George W. Bush. Why? Because my parents were Republican. It's what we do. And it wasn't until he started a war that I was like, oh wait, like maybe that had some repercussions. But I was a stupid kid. Like, I didn't know any better. You know, you're raised to believe what you believe until someone gives you a reason not to. And in my particular case, I'm curious enough to where I just started, you know, I was like, okay, so why did we start this war? And then I started looking into it. And every time I got an answer, it led to 50 more questions, to the point now that it's, 12 years later, and I'm devoting my life to trying to figure out what's going on. And it's awesome because I still have that thing in me where I want to know. So the fact that I'm at the point now that I will make a career out of this. Like, it's going to happen, especially after this week. Like, I'm positive this is going to work. But to be able to research and figure this out for a living is almost like therapy to me, because I need to know.
Yeah, I
need to know what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's what motivates us. It's one of those things where I never understood people who just went along with the motions and never really asked questions, because to me it's like, while we're on this planet, like, my life goal is trying to figure out as much as I can, and everything that I try to figure out, if it's philosophy, if it's political, if it's history, you know, historical events, it's like one more piece to that puzzle, and then every piece you put together, that, you know, you create this picture that makes a little bit more sense. And my goal is like, try to get as many pieces as possible to make sense of this, you know, this picture. And you know, and to me that's what it's about. And I think that's what motivates all of us. I mean, again, most people who start podcasts or do anything crazy like read every bill, I mean, we're motivated because we're passionate. One, we care, and like, you know, as you know, I just had a son not too long ago. That's actually why this podcast got postponed a little bit. So thank you for being understanding with that whole situation.
Of course, congratulations.
Thank you. And now I kind of see, and it's funny because now going from, you know, a month ago, you know, a little over a month ago, to not have a child in my life and have a little bit more free time, and now being, you know, having a child, I absolutely see how people can just get so caught up in your everyday priorities and responsibilities. And, you know, because a lot of times you hear this conversation about, well, people are dumb because, you know, they don't care about learning, they don't care about researching, and then they can be convinced of anything. And I'm like, well, some of it is, yeah, I mean, there's people who just spend a lot of time watching mindless entertainment, but I think a lot of it also is we live super stressful lives. We have so many priorities and responsibilities that a lot of times when you do have free time, you don't want to read a bill, you don't want to, you know, research, you know, historical events. You want to just watch something mindless, and you want to watch WWE or whatever it is that and just get your mind off things. And then, you know, that's with any energy that you do have left after chasing, you know, a 1-year-old around or 2-year-old around or whatever. So I completely see how people can get caught up in this, and I think that we're somebody who has multiple kids and is a family person and is caught up in just raising that family, they don't have time to really know what the fuck's going on. And then that's perfect for the people running the show, because they're just going to go along with whatever's going on. Oh shit, taxes went up. Oh, that sucks. But guess what? I got to pay the bills. I got to keep working. So you don't have time to complain or research it. So I just think I can definitely see how people get caught up in this just vicious cycle of working and then buying shit, creating debt, and then working some more, then buying shit, creating debt, and just this vicious cycle that continues, and you have no time to actually know what's going on.
Yeah, and even the people that try to know what's going on. I mean, the first thing I did when I quit the corporate world and I was like, okay, I want to know what's going on, I turned on the television, and I mean, Fox News was pretty easy to figure out what was going on there. It didn't take very long. But even, you look at MSNBC, now we have that new documentary, Mad as Hell, about Cenk Uygur. And he tells us that he was called into a meeting where he is told, we are insiders here and you either play or you get out, And it's like we find out this stuff. But the average person, they think they're being informed by watching the news. They would rather be watching something else. But they're watching the news to try and figure out what's going on. But the news is bullshitting them. And so, I mean, that was a big part of why I started Congressional Dish, because it was like, okay, I can at least make this a little bit easier for people to understand and just do it to the best of my ability. I mean, I don't know if I'm right about everything, but I'm linking to everything I'm finding in the bill so that people can check my work. But if I could find a way to make this stuff about Congress easy enough for that person to fit into their busy lives, then maybe we can make people more informed and aware and not have it be so painful, because to actually filter all that stuff, I've been doing it for 12 years and I'm still struggling. Like there's so much bullshit out there, and so much of what's going out into the media is paid for by advertisers. NBC is owned by GE, which is a defense contractor. So there are certain stories we're not going to get from them, and then Fox News, for Christ's sake, is owned by Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's basically a right-wing propaganda machine. And so that's a huge problem too, is that people don't know where to turn. I don't think people are stupid, but where do you get this information? And that was the problem when it came to Congress, why I started, to go back to your question from like a million years ago. One of the reasons I started reading the actual bills is because I couldn't find the information myself. And then when I started reading I just wanted primary sources. I'm a communications major, and I was just like, I don't believe what I'm being told by these people that are filtering it. Let's see what it is for myself. And then when I started discovering what was inside of them, that's when I said, oh my God, there's stuff in here that is not being discussed, that's not being discovered. And while we're talking about elections, there's actual laws that are being made. And this is the stuff that should be covered by the news and isn't. And if they're not going to talk about it, someone has to, even if it's some dope like me, So I'm not claiming to know everything, but I can at least read it and tell people what I think I'm seeing. It's just all I can do. And so when it came to like having a podcast, that was also like the service that I felt like I could provide. It was the thing that I can do. Anyone can have a political podcast and give their opinions, but I was like, no, I need to like put something out there that's not already there, because truly, I don't think anyone cares about my opinion, but they do care what's in these bills, and so that's just what I could offer the world.
I would disagree. I think your opinion is important, because I think as many bills as you read, I mean, you're going to have a very interesting and different perspective on what's going on and on these bills than most of us. I mean, you could explain a bill to me, but you might not know, that maybe there's something in that bill that you've seen before that seems weird or seems out of place, or who's backing that bill, and they backed a similar bill before. So you have a lot of information that the common person like myself doesn't have. And so I think don't give yourself a little more credit. I think we do want to hear your opinion. I love both. I love the fact that you're giving, strictly information so people can take and that information, do what they want with it. But you're also, at times your opinion does shine through a little bit at times, and you don't, it's not Bill O'Reilly, it's not an opinion show, but it's, I think it's good that your opinion does come out, because I think people want to know who Jen is, and where do you stand, and with all the information you have, what do you think about it, and I think it's okay for people to disagree. I mean, that's the thing about opinions. It's like you talked about Mad as Hell. I saw the documentary, and I thought it was awesome. I thought it was great for anybody like yourself or me who ever second guesses being yourself and being open with your opinions, because he was open with his opinions all the time, and he got so much shit and had so much resistance. Even his own friends are like, he's fucking crazy. Just shut the hell up. Like, he's never going to make it. I mean, and he just stopped listening. I had Dave Rubin on like soon after I watched that documentary, and we were talking about it, and how I was telling him how it's like inspiring, because it was inspiring to see somebody who was told by everybody that you were never going to make it and you weren't going to do anything. And then he just kept pushing through. And I think that's important. The thing about opinions too is that if you're opinionated, unfortunately, like even like a Bill O'Reilly or, whoever, if people hate you, they're going to listen. And if people love you, they're going to listen. So it's almost like if you're opinionated, then at least you're getting attention. And I think that's a good thing. And if your opinions come from the right place, I mean, I can disagree with somebody, but if they truly believe in something because they truly believe it's bad or good or whatever, and their heart's in the right place, I can at least respect them for that. It's when people are just trying to sell bullshit and snake oil, that's when I have an issue with it. But if somebody truly believes, in this bill or that bill or this politician or that politician, and they don't do it because they're trying to sell you some bullshit, but because their heart's in the right place and they were just, I guess, sold something and they bought it. But so I think that's the big difference. I think, we don't have to always agree. And I think that's the big thing about alternative media, is that we don't have to. I've had people on that are libertarians. I've had people on who are Christians, atheists. I've had people on, all different, perspectives. And they all bring something that I love. And there's a part of their work that I love that I want to share with listeners. And and I think that whatever our differences are, I think that if there's some good things and if their heart's in the right place, and I think that their purpose is to share good information, good opinions, different perspectives, provoke thought, and cause a ripple, then I think you'd like how I threw that in, and
I like that.
And I think it's worth doing, and it's worth listening to. I would never turn my back on anybody that I'm a fan of because I find out that we disagree on one thing or another. And I listen to people that still believe that global warming is kind of bullshit, but yet they do all this other good work, but so it's one of those things where you can still take things that are good in what they do. So I think that's the important thing.
I guess what I meant by that is just when I was thinking of starting the podcast, that's when I wanted to create something new and not just make it about me. Like, I'm totally, like, I've gone on so many podcasts where it's all discussion based and they're great and they have value, and I'm not saying that they don't, but it was just when it came to mine, I just wanted to put something out there, put information out there that wasn't being provided. And it's given me an opportunity, like you said, because I've read these bills, and now people actually are looking for my opinion, which is why that Ask Me Anything blew up the way it did. Ricky, when I signed on at 8 a.m. to do that Ask Me Anything, I was expecting 20 questions, and I had plans to go to the gym 2 hours later. Like, I didn't think that I would be sitting there 10 hours and 41 minutes later.
10 hours? Oh.
Yes, and that's when I finally answered, like, the last question that was there. My husband's like, you need to stop. So that's when I finally ended it. And I'm still kind of going back and, like, having the conversations. But the response to that, it was so heartwarming to find out that many people care about what's in the bills, I was told by so many people, no one cares what's going on in Congress. Like, good luck with your little project, but, we'll see you when you're back in the corporate world earning a paycheck. And so far, I hate to say this because I sound like a dick, but I was right. Like, people care, and it's really exciting for me to find out that I guess that people care about facts and details. Yeah.
And you're doing the work that a lot of us, some of us don't have time or even just understanding of a bill to even take that information and share it. Like you said, you have a niche where, even though this is obviously a conversation podcast and not the bash conversation podcast, but there's a lot of them. And there's an endless amount of conversation podcasts. If you're looking for one, this is just, it's a dime a dozen. Yours is different because you are giving information that no other podcast is giving out. No other, website or anything, really focusing on. And you're taking the time to read these bills. You're taking the time to explain these bills. And not just that, I like also how you linked them to our lives, like why are they important to us and how they affect our lives and stuff like that, which is awesome too, because I mean that's the thing. I think you could just read a bill, you can just what's did that pass, whatever, but you talk about, well, this affects that, and how it's going to affect us, and it does affect us. That's the thing. Like our hard earned money, we're so many of us are could lose our job today and then lose our house tomorrow, and yet they're just recklessly spending money back and forth, and just like nothing. When we're bombing ISIS or Syria, whatever the hell they were doing, they talked about like the Tomahawk missiles they were dropping, how they dropped like 10 or 20 of them, whatever it was, and each one was like $5 million, and we're just like, I'm like watching TV and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like that's just millions of dollars you're just dropping in a conflict that most Americans don't know anything about, and really don't even understand what the long-term effects are going to be. Who are we helping? Who are they going to end up spawning? And so it's just one of those
and
things.
Who are we killing?
Yeah,
that's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Is like I think about being just a normal family. Like I live in a high rise in downtown Oakland, and when it rains here, they turn the planes around and they go like right over my building just all day long. And I was thinking, like, what if those were armed with Predator drones? There are people where that's their reality, where they don't know if that plane above them is going to blow up their homes. And we don't know who these people are that we're killing. We're told that they're terrorists and insurgents. We're never given their names. We're never told anything about them and what they did or what they planned to do, because we never even say that they did anything. And so that's the thing. Like, I don't want my tax dollars going to killing anybody, especially if they're innocent, of hurting us. And really, since 9/11, we haven't taken any big hits, so it's like, I don't know why it's necessary for us to be killing thousands of people, and for what? So that we can protect the oil pipeline that goes from Erbil through Turkey, or to take the oil underneath Iraq's feet, and the agriculture resources in Ukraine. I mean, really, multinationals having access to those resources is not something I'm willing to kill over. And that's my opinion, but it definitely does shape when I look at this stuff, and I feel guilty for it because I am chipping into that system. And I feel like it's my responsibility to do everything I can to stop something that I feel is so wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, I read a story about how people in Yemen are afraid of a clear sky day because that's when the drones come out. I mean, that's fucking terrifying to think of that. I mean, and like you said, like I think it was Vice News who did wrote an article about how every drone attack creates like 50 more terrorists, because and I always make the example, like you said, put yourself in their situation. If somebody you love was killed by a drone attack, your life goal will be to get revenge on that country or that military or whoever. So it's to think that we don't have, and even Obama, I don't know what interview he was doing. I don't know if it was for Vice or recently he did an interview, and he admitted that like Iraq spawned ISIS. It was because of what we did in Iraq that spawned ISIS. It was, and we have to take responsibility. That's why this debate about is it religion or is it foreign policy that creates these terrorists? I think it's a little bit of both, but I think that we can't ignore that foreign policy has a huge hand in it. If you have if you have a group like ISIS or Al Qaeda or whatever, and you're trying to recruit people, what better way to recruit people than showing them videos of drone attacks, or having members in your group that lost loved ones to casualties and by Blackwater or whoever who just shot random civilians. So I just think that we're making it easier to recruit people, and we have to ask the question, well, why is ISIS getting so many international people to join them, and people from Australia, people from the US? Why does everybody want to join them? And we have to look at, are we responsible for that? Do we have a hand in that? And then that's when it goes to why are we spending money to create more terrorists, where maybe indirectly, and then also we're spending money to fight them, and then is there somebody benefiting from that, from both of those? And I think there is.
Yeah, I am jaded to the point that I question what ISIS even is, to tell you the truth. I question everything about it. I question whether the stuff we're being told about people from all over the world joining ISIS, I'm questioning if that's even true. I'm sure there are incidences of it happening, but I don't know anybody who's flying off to Syria and trying to become ISIS. I've never met any of those people, and I don't know anyone who's met any of those people. So who the fuck are these people? You know, we're being told it on the news. But then if you look at the actual strategy, in my last episode, my friend Matt and I, we watched 3 hearings, and it was very clear that there are plans right now to take over Mosul. And whoever they're calling ISIS is in Mosul, but Mosul is a strategic city that is right on this pipeline that goes from the oil town of Erbil into Turkey and then over to Europe. And that's more of the reason, in my opinion, why we need Mosul. You know, but ISIS, or whatever ISIS is, has had Fallujah for years, and we don't give a shit. So for us to say that we're doing this for the Iraqis and we just want to free them and blah, 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 it's not true. And then in, summer of 2013, the president goes on TV, tells the world, we're about to bomb Syria. Assad uses chemical weapons, all that crap. The British basically shut it down. And a year later, we have ISIS in Syria, so we have to bomb them right away. It's just so convenient.
Exactly.
All the ISIS bullshit that I take it with a grain of salt, you know? I don't know who these people are, so how can I judge them and call them terrorists when I don't believe my government. And I think that's really dangerous too. When you've been lied to so many times, you don't even believe the stuff that maybe is even true. You know, like, I don't know how to filter the truth from the lies. So at this point, I just follow the money and the corporate interests. And I feel like that explains a lot more of what's happening than things like ISIS, you know?
Yeah, no, there's a good documentary called Iraq for Sale. I don't know if you ever watched it, but it's really good, and it shows. Yeah, and then they showed Halliburton, KBR, all these people that are making money off it. So that's the thing, like, you know, when there's so many companies that are profiting from war, then there's going to be a lot more war. And like you said, it's one of those things where even if there is a ISIS, are they really a threat? No. And like you said, it's convenient how he tried to sell, Obama tried to sell us the idea of going to Syria because of chemical weapons, even though they were having a civil war forever, and we never gave a shit. It never got any news, never talked about it. Then all of a sudden, it's like they did this 1 month of like propaganda campaigning of like, oh, we have to go to Syria, chemical weapons, even though a lot of international newspapers talked about how it wasn't, you know, the Syrian government that used those chemical weapons, and which kind of makes sense, because if you know that, you know, the U.S. is going to get involved if you use chemical weapons, why would you use them? You might as well just keep them, you know, out of the picture and not give them a justification to get involved. But it was convenient that eventually, after I thought that, I thought we won. I thought, like, holy shit, the U.S. people said, we don't want to go there, and then they lost. They tried to sell us this war. We didn't want another war, and it worked. And then soon after, like you said, ISIS popped up. All these beheadings popped up, and it's like everybody's like, look at these beheadings. It's sickening. It's blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, look at our torture report. I'm like, you know, what's the difference? Like, we're wearing different uniforms, different costumes. Like, we could be called terrorists. They could be called terrorists. We could be called freedom fighters. They could be called freedom fighters. It's all a matter of your perspective and what side you're on. But not one act is more vicious or violent or disgusting than the other act. They're both disgusting. But yet, you know, it's all about perception. And because we're on this side, we say what we did was for information, and you know, and we kind of brush it off, and what they did was disgusting. And I think that, you know, we have to start seeing things from other people's perspectives and other countries' perspectives, and look at the way we might come off as, and then what that might cause. You know, it might cause people to want to join things like ISIS and stuff like that. So I just think, I mean, I think the whole thing is crazy. I think it's sad, like you said, that we can't just turn on the news and just say, oh, okay, this is what's happening. We have to be like, oh shit, this is what they're telling us is happening. What's really happening? You know, I think that's scary.
Yeah. In my my most latest episode, I mean, we're working on this whole hearing episode thing, so it's the topics go back and forth. We're trying to figure out how to do it. But and I pretty much, like what you were saying before, I just throw the dots out there and people can connect them however they will. And the dots that were connected for me by watching those hearings is that they want to retake Mosul they were saying like the summer is what they're aiming for. And they're going to put permanent bases for some reason, the number 3 is in my head, 3 countries, but there's at least a few permanent bases they want to put right on Russia's border. Why isn't any of that on the news? Like, that's really big stuff. I was able to find out about it just by watching hearings publicly available to anyone in the world. And none of this is being discussed. So it's going to be really interesting as the summer approaches to see if this Mosul thing does happen, how it's sold to us, you know, because here we are, like, this is a unique experience for me to be in where it's like, I feel like I know what's being planned. So it's going to be really fascinating to see if it all plays out. Like, is it going to be another beheading and it happened in Mosul and we have to go now? Or like, what's the justification going to be? And so I don't want to say that I'm excited about that, because obviously I don't want to take over another city, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next few months about Mosul. And I've already started to hear the word creep into C-SPAN here and there. I haven't seen it in the mainstream media at all, but it'll be fascinating in the next few months, because I'm telling you, that was very clear in these hearings that it is being planned right now. It's not a we should do this, it's a when will we do this. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's what's crazy is that shit happens all the time. Things are just publicly there, and we just kind of brush it off, and that's it. And I remember watching the documentary, The Trials of Henry Kissinger, and just seeing how, like, everything that, you know, that we thought we were getting involved or not getting involved in a conflict was for the better of that country or the politics in that country. It all was geopolitical strategy. And it seems like almost everything we do is strategy. And no matter what they try to sell you on, it's strategy. And so it just, yeah, I think that it's insane. And so reading so many of these bills, what's the craziest thing you read? Was there anything that you're like, I can't believe they're trying to sneak this in this bill, or it was something that helped some other industry and had nothing to do with the industry that what this bill was meant for? Anything like that?
The one that it still stuns me to this day. I think it was the middle of last year. Yeah, the episode was in the 50s, but there was this bill, HR 992, that basically allows the banks that were gambling with credit default swaps to go back to doing it with the institutions that house our deposits. Because the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform law said, like, okay, you can still gamble with these risky derivatives, which is insane, but it still let them do that. It just said you have to do it in a separate institution. So use your profits, use whatever the hell you want to, except for people's deposits that are insured by the FDIC. And so here comes this bill that lets them use our deposits again to gamble in the way that crashed the economy in 2008. And the Senate didn't take it up. The Senate wanted nothing to do with it. And then just a few months ago with the 2015 Cromnibus budget, this thing was a monster. It was over 1,600 pages. It was available for less than 48 hours before it was passed by the House of Representatives. And that bill was attached to it. And now it's law. Like, it's so crazy. So we're already preparing for the next crash to allow these banks to get bailouts from our tax money again. And I just couldn't believe that they had the balls to take that thing, which actually did hit the press. People did care about that when it first passed, and then to stick it onto the budget. And the thing was that unless that was signed into law, the government was going to shut down. So it's like, that's how this stuff becomes law. And that's not even the only scandal in the 2015 budget bill. There were a bunch of them. I did a whole episode. But that one in particular was just so... There's not a single person that I've ever met that I think would be in favor of allowing that behavior again. And yet it became law, and it was a priority of specifically the Republicans in the House of Representatives. I mean, that was just... I'm still amazed that it happened.
But doesn't that tell you who's influencing the decision making? I mean, it's...
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think... Who do you think what industry has the most influence on Congress?
Banks.
By far, banks?
Oh, banks. Yeah, definitely. Fossil fuels and defense are close. I don't know which one would be second. Fossil fuels influence is actually far more than I had ever imagined. You know, it's right up there with banks and defense and the amount of power that it has, especially over the Republican Party. That was pretty shocking to me. But banks and, you know, defense contractors, it's stunning the amount of power that they have. But the banks, I mean, they get whatever they want, and they get it from both parties. It's not just the Republicans. I mean, the Republicans are all for it pretty much, but the Democrats, there is a big chunk of them that are owned by the banks too. It's pretty scary.
Well, I
In
wonder.
fact, that bill I just told you about, it was 80 lines. It wasn't very long. And 75 of them, we know for a fact, were written by Citigroup lobbyists. They just took the text right from the bank.
But that's who usually. That's the thing. Like a lot of people, if you look into, I actually had Jack Abramoff on the show once, and
Really?
yeah, he's actually a really nice dude. Even though I think he's a little delusional. We talked about the documentary and about him, Casino Jack, and the film, the HBO film with Kevin Spacey. And I'll tell you, man, like the first thing he did was like complain about how shitty films they were, like, not like the things that it exposed or the things he did, but he's like, oh, the acting was bad, and they didn't really focus on character development. And I'm like, are you fucking insane? I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, all the shitty things you did, how corrupt you were, how you fucked Indian tribes and casinos, and how I don't know how familiar you are with his story, but like, how
I am.
They took, the islands that were considered American territory, and yet they didn't have, I guess, in other words, you could put on their products made in America, even though they didn't have the same rules that we did. So you could have sweatshops and put made in America. They took advantage of that shit. I mean, he did so many things. Then his one complaint was, oh, the films weren't well done. I'm like, Jack, seriously, like, really? Like, that's not, like, even the point. Like, the point is that, like, it was, I can see how he can be upset. Obviously, they expose how shitty of a person he was at one time. And it's weird. I finished talking to him, and I kind of did have a feeling like maybe he has seen the light a little bit. But then we got into the conversation about how sometimes people from the private sector get involved in government, and people in government in the private sector and all that stuff. And he talked about how when people from the private sector get into government, how it's good because they understand the industry. And I'm like, well, what about conflicting interests? I'm like, isn't that an issue? I'm like, you look at, Dick Cheney and Halliburton. You think it's a coincidence that Halliburton got non-bid contracts in Iraq after Dick Cheney became vice president? No, of course it's not. So it was just, but he's like, oh, so it's just like, I still think he's delusional. I think he was, like you said, like when you're a kid, you're raised into being a Republican, and he was raised as a young Republican and all this shit. And I think he's still delusional about how corrupt it is, where he comes out and he's kind of an activist, for lack of a better term, and talking about how corrupt lobbying is and stuff like that. But he's still a little delusional about the Republican Party, a little delusional about how even some of the things that he went along with, how corrupt it all really is. And I think he'll admit that it's corrupt, but he still draws a line where he thinks that it still works, and there's still I don't know, it just seemed weird talking to him. Just, it seemed, because I'm not sure I finished the conversation actually understanding or establishing a real opinion on him. I look back and I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like, in a way, I want to believe he's a good person, but I'm like, in a way, I think that he's been brainwashed at such a young age that he's just still going to believe that, Republicans are the way to fix this country, and that, he has those strong conservative views, and I don't know. It was kind of weird, but I mean, I'll say it was really nice of him to come on and to talk, and I know he was on Breaking the Set with Abby Martin, also a while ago. A while ago. Yeah, it was before he was on my show, and how did you
reach out to him? Because I just want to pick his brain and find out how it all works. I don't give a shit about him. I mean, the man has to sleep at night, so I think there has to be some mental gymnastics, like justifying what he did.
Well, he did,
but I just want to know how it works.
He did admit that, because I'm like, well, how much was of you doing 4 years in jail change your perspective on what you did, and obviously you had a lot of time to think or whatever. And he's like, I'd be lying if I said it didn't, and a lot of people like myself, think, well, if you didn't do time, maybe you'd still be the same person. And so it was
probably,
so it was more than likely. So I mean, it's one of those things where, well, it was great that you saw the light, but it took you getting caught to see the light, so it just it is interesting. But I can get you his email address, and I don't remember how.
Please do. That would be amazing.
I can't remember how the hell I got his email address, but one way or another I got it, and I'll give it to you. And he's actually a really nice guy who'll respond, and you can let him know that I gave it to you or whatever, and hopefully you get to talk to him, because you guys probably have a lot more in common than I do with understanding these bills. But that's the thing, like the reason why I was so interested in talking to him is because most people don't understand that a lot of the language in bills are dictated by lobbyists. A lot of people voting for these bills most of the time don't even read a lot of the bills, if any of the bills, and you see sometimes in debates, you see presidential debates where, oh, you backed this bill or you whatever, and you could tell they don't know anything about the bill. They just backed it, and it wasn't even consistent with their views because they were just getting some campaign money or God knows what, and they backed some ridiculous bills. So yeah, it's interesting. I think lobbying is a huge issue, and just like the Young Turks talk about how it's just it's one of the issues they really focus on is money in politics, and I think that it's a huge issue. But I think that politicians, just like CEOs and corporations, they can all be corrupt. They'll, even if it's not money, it's power, and they find some other way of influencing industry or influencing whatever. And I think it's people, there's always going to be corrupt people. It doesn't matter what industry it is, if it's politics or corporations. And it's like I said earlier, it's not either or. I think it's both.
Well, if I was Jack, I would be really pissed that I spent 4 years in jail while the people that gave him the money to give to the politicians and the politicians that took the money, that they're all just fine. Like they're still out there. I'm sure a bunch of them are still in office. He was the fall guy, and I'd have to imagine that to have 4 years of your life, like, I'm not going to say it was taken from him, but to be the only one who pays a price for something that is just how business is done in Washington. I love that he's going out and telling people what's happening right now. I think he's not cool.
That's the thing. He's not like you said, he's not the only one. And he's not, he was basically the one who basically, it was like their way, and they do this all the time. Well, to make an example out of somebody, and they made an example out of him to be like, oh, see, we're anti-lobbyists. That's why we're, but he was just a fall guy. He took a hit for doing what a lot of lobbyists do, and so yeah, like you said, it's
and doing it the best.
Yeah,
that's the thing. He was the fall guy because he was good at it, and that's why I'm just like salivating at the thought of getting to talk to him, because I want to know, like, how do you walk in and bribe a politician legally? Like, how does that go? Do you call first? That was the thing about the AMA. People kept asking me these questions, being like, I got at least 10 people. So how much is Washington like House of Cards? I'm like, I don't fucking know.
I think it's a
Jack would know.
But I think it's a lot. I had Valerie Baber on, who worked at the Emperor's Club, which is where Elliot Spitzer got in trouble. He had that mistress from the Emperor's Club, and Valerie Baber actually worked there. And we talked a little on air and off air about it, and that type of shit happens a lot. I mean, you get politicians who get prostitutes from, you look at the DC madam, she killed herself, and she had a list of politicians that were customers or at her business. And it makes you wonder, like, why wouldn't they not want to kill her and make sure that information doesn't go out? It's no different than college recruiting. Like, we all know that the big star high school athlete goes to these colleges, they go to these campuses, they get invited to these crazy parties, they have girls that show them around, and they get drunk, they probably hook up. Well, it's not much different with with politicians and lobbying and all that stuff. I mean, we know this shit's going on, just a lot of times it's hush hush and nobody talks about it. But to think that if it happens in college sports, it doesn't happen where there's a lot more money involved and lobbying power. And power. That'd be ridiculous. Of course it's going on, So I think that, the Elliot Spitzer thing, it's a perfect example of, like, they do hook up with hookers, and they do get offered a lot of money, and they do. I mean, with the Jack Abramoff, I remember when they wanted to go to that island to go take a look at it, because they had some conversation about having sweatshops there. They brought them there. They went on, like, they went golfing. They stayed at a 5-star hotel and all that stuff. And, they
all expenses paid.
Exactly. So it's insanity, So, I mean, I just think that everybody's doing favors for each other, and everybody's, it's like Jesse Ventura once said, it's no different than pro wrestling, on TV and on when the camera's on, that we all act like we're conflicting and we're fighting. And then when the doors close, we're all, working for the same people and doing the same things,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll have to. I didn't give you anywhere to go with that, but
I can't disagree.
But yeah, I think I'll definitely get you his email address and wish you some good luck with getting that, because I'll definitely listen in. That'll be interesting to have you guys talk about that. And but he's I have to admit, it was really cool for him to come on, and especially a big of a name as he is, and to come on and talk. And I'm not sure he knew where I stood on anything. And honestly, I don't have a distinct side on anything anyway. So I just like having these conversations and getting.
Well, and I have no interest in like bashing him. You did what you did, and you did a job that, quite frankly, is fun. To be able to go to islands and take people on vacation and shit. Who wouldn't want that job? I don't blame the guy, but he knows the inner workings of a system and is willing to talk. And God, that'd be amazing.
Well, that's the thing. That kind of brings up an interesting point, because I wonder how much of like what a politician or lobbyist turns into, how many of them actually start off as like good morals, good person, and then the system just slowly, it's like, well, if I want to get a little higher on the ladder, I just kind of do this, and I just pull this string, and I become friends with this guy and take a little money here or give a little money there, and then all of a sudden it's just a downward spiral of like you get caught up in the system, and you could take a really good person and eventually just become like everybody else.
Well, and I say that on the podcast pretty much as I can remember to do so, that I don't think really anybody that I've witnessed and watched in the Congress in the last few years, I don't think that they're bad people. Like I don't think that they think that they're doing something wrong. There's this one guy, Pete Sessions of Texas. I disagree with him on almost everything, but he goes onto the floor constantly and he says, in all my years in working in the corporate sector, or the private sector, I never took a day off. And I'm just like, you're a loser, but you think that whatever is good for business is good for the world. You're a good company man, and he's proud of being a good company man and doing the bidding of business. Now, a lot of the things that he pushes for in the bills that he helps come to the floor, because he's the chairman of the Rules Committee, a lot of the things he does, they hurt the public, but they're great for business. But he is there as a businessman to represent business people. He is not a bad person. I'm sure if you were to have a beer with him, it would be a good time. And he's definitely polite, and he's a gentleman. He really is. And so that's the thing, like, to make it personal, I don't think it's fair, Like, there's this one conservative lady. I think she's a Looney Tune when it comes to politics. Her name's Martha Roby, but I want to give her a hug. She's so sweet, and when she talks about stuff, like, she doesn't really understand what she's saying, but she's really, really nice. And so I just think that to make it about the person, to like make what Jack Abramoff did about him as a person, and to make the congressman like, oh, you pass bad laws and therefore you are bad people, I think it does us all a good service, or a disservice, because it's about the policy, it's about job performance, not the people. So when you start talking about like personalities, the bills and the laws get lost in the shuffle. It's like, if these people are passing bad laws, they deserve to be fired, but they don't need to go to jail. They don't need, I just don't, I think politics gets so vicious, and I don't think it has to be, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think some of them should go to jail, because I think one of the biggest problems is that white-collar crime, kind of gets a pass. I think that we look at criminal and we think the guy who's homeless, robbing people, and we don't look at, the politician or the CEO robbing the taxpayers, and I think they're both criminals. I mean, I think that, you both, I mean, if you're one's stealing because of necessity, the other one's stealing because of greed, and I almost see that worse than the necessity. I mean, there's people who steal or rob because they're addicts and they need help, or because they don't have any food and they need help. And so I just think that we have to look at both of them as the same, and or sometimes even the greed worse. No,
I don't think so, because like the policies that I'm seeing, it's not like the politicians are writing themselves a check. There is this whole complicated system that really, it is legal what they're doing. They've changed the laws to make it legal, but it's not like they're taking our money and saying this bill is going to give me $100,000. Now, it might funnel a contract to my husband's business or something like that, which is unethical. But I don't think prison is necessary. And in a lot of cases, it's a distraction. These people are trusted to use government, which is a tool that we use to organize ourselves. They're trusted to use government to do what's best for the public. If they don't do that, the proper punishment is losing that trust, losing that ability to use that tool. I don't think that you have to lock up a person for writing a bill that we don't like, or using a system that right now is perfectly legal. And yes, it was self-serving of them to change the laws to make that happen, but it didn't happen overnight. So you'd be punishing the people that are currently in office for using a system that has been built over many, many years and many, many Congresses. So that's why I feel like, I don't know, punishment for politicians in particular, I'm not comfortable with it.
Well, I don't think that, like, if you pass a shitty bill, you should be locked up. But I think in some circumstances, like Bush and Cheney, and those guys are war criminals. You look at Henry Kissinger. You look at these people are war criminals. I think that these people should be locked up. And I think that when you are in that high of power, then we just look at it as, they did a shitty job, and you move on. But they affected people's lives. People died because of decisions they made. And and the worst part is, I don't mind. I shouldn't say I don't mind, but I can accept the idea if people died because decisions you made. Because if you're the president, you have to make tough decisions. I can accept the idea that your heart was in the right place, and it was just a decision you had to make, and then unfortunately people passed away, or somebody died in a drone attack or whatever. But I'm not sure your heart's in the right place. It's all about geopolitical strategy. It's about selling more tanks to the military so this company can make more money, and I just don't see any honesty in their decision making. And so I just think it's one of those things where we have to look at them. And same thing with, like, I get in a lot of conversations about welfare, and people talk about welfare blah, blah, and I'm like, well, look at corporate welfare, look at subsidies, look at I'm like, we don't. It's funny how we spend so much time looking at, like, the petty criminal or the the people on welfare, but we don't look at all the people who are benefiting off the system. And like you said, like, unfortunately there are loopholes and there are holes in the system that they can take advantage of, but that's because the system was written by them. And you look at, like, the power and the influence that banks have. A lot of it has to do with, like, the JP Morgans, Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and how they had so much influence on our policies that even today, I have a family-owned construction company, and one thing is don't fuck with the railroads. Like, you could be, you don't touch them, because they have their own rules and they have their own guidelines, and that's all goes back from the early 1900s, when the railroads had so much influence that now they basically have their own say. They could shut down a railroad, shut down a whole road, a street, a main street, and shut down a railroad, so you can't cross to the other side of the street, and nobody can say anything. Police can't say anything. The town can't say anything, and they just, that's it. And that's because they created the system that we live in. They've molded and influenced the system we live in. And it was molded and influenced and designed for benefiting them. And so, I think that even though they use these loopholes, and we can say, oh, well, what they do is legal technically, but it's only legal because they create those loopholes so it can be legal. So I'm not sure that gives them a pass,
I don't know. I think it just goes toward, like, I don't know. I'm so focused on your railroad thing because it makes me crazy that we allow our public. The railroad tracks themselves are infrastructure, but they're privately owned.
Yeah, they are.
And so that's a part of it too, is that we've allowed the commons to be privately owned and controlled. That's why Amtrak sucks. That's why you can't take a cross-country trip and expect to actually be on the timetables, because they have to go on the timetables set by Union Pacific and CSX, And but there's just been, like, this slow creep of making the government less, I want to, maybe effective is the word I'm looking for. But we're giving private control of so many things that should have been for the commons. And that was all done by changing laws. And the solution to that is changing the laws back, not necessarily going and locking up the people that made those laws happen. You know what I mean? Like, I do think that, your example of Bush and Cheney in particular, would I like to see him behind bars because someone needs to pay for what happened during those 8 years? Yeah, I'd like to see it. Is it going to change anything about the situation we're in now? No. You know, it could maybe stop someone in the future from doing things like I think the thing that we could lock up Cheney for right now legally with no problems is the Dragnet, the spying network, because we know that program was illegal. And when John Ashcroft refused to sign it and James Comey, who's the acting attorney general, refused to sign it, they had Alberto Gonzales sign it. That thing was running and it was illegal. And so that we know was a crime, and he could go to jail for that. But at the same time, like, even if you put him in jail for that, even if you put Alberto in there with him, it doesn't make the Utah data center go away. You know, it doesn't make the fact that they're probably watching this video right now if they want to. It doesn't change any of it. So it's like, I would rather focus our energy on getting better people into office and changing those laws that we don't like back to something that, you know, benefits the people, than kind of like seeking revenge upon the people that got us here.
But how do you get somebody to actually have any influence and make their way up the ladder, the political ladder, if the game's rigged, where unless you take money and unless you are a little corrupt, you're not going to make it anyways? I mean, you look at Ron Paul, you look at Dennis Kucinich, you look at these guys who are sincerely good people, and you know, there's a reason why neither one of them ever became president, and there's a reason why you know, Dennis Kucinich isn't even, you know, in politics, I don't think, at the moment right now. And you know, it's one of those things where if you don't take money, then you're not going to win, but then if you take money, then you owe favors. And so it's just like, it's like this corrupt system where it's just like, you know, I don't know what the answer is, but I don't know. I'm a little skeptical about just voting in new politicians and crossing my fingers, because I was like you. I mean, Obama, I think, is changing our perspective on politics for our generation and for hopefully future generations, because he did. I think some of it had to do not so much with I liked Obama, but more because I hated Bush and Cheney, that I wanted something so different, and he seemed so different that's what I kind of jumped on board with. But I think that he had so many of us convinced that he at least, I mean, not to say that, you know, he wasn't going to be a corrupt politician. Of course he was. You know, they all are. But I thought he wasn't going to be nearly as bad as those guys. And then come to find out that the foreign policy hasn't changed, that he's, you know, prosecuting whistleblowers, that he's, you know, doing all these, you know, the drone attacks and, you know, just all this fucked up shit. And I'm just like, wait, he tricked me, because I really thought that he at least his foreign policy was going to be different, you know, at least he was going to, you know, because I figured, okay, Dick Cheney and Bush fucked up our foreign policy, and the perspective of the U.S. from the rest of the world was so bad when they were there. Now it's a fresh face, fresh start, and unfortunately, our foreign policy and our president ends up being the face of this country. I have family from overseas, and they look at the U.S. and they look at our foreign policy and our president as the way they look at the country. And when Bush and Cheney was in office, I had to tell people, wait, not all of us believe in this shit. Well, but you guys voted him, but you voted him in again. And I'm like, I don't know who voted him in, because I don't know anybody who doesn't know these guys are fucking crazy. But you know, so it's hard to convince people that, you know, what we're doing or what our politicians are doing doesn't represent all of the, you know, citizens and people who live here. And, you know, when Obama came in office, I'm like, this is a fresh start. We can finally have, you know, the rest of the world can look at us like, oh shit, they're not going to be the warmongering, you know, Republicans anymore. And, you know, it's a fresh face and fresh start. And now we realize things, you know, haven't changed much. And I think that finally we're getting to the point that, like, holy shit, like, the Republicans lie to us, now the Democrats lie to us. Now we realize that it doesn't fucking matter if there's an R or D next to your name. You're all working for the same people. You know, we need to continue war. You know, you look at Eisenhower when he talked about the industrial war complex. I mean, we don't, you know, he said these words. I mean, this is a president leaving office, and that was his lasting, even though he kind of helped create it, but it was his lasting message, was that he wanted people to know that and remember that. And we just kind of brush it off like it's nothing, you know. And, you know, look at War is a Racket by Smedley Butler, you know, and just all these, all these signs that obviously most of our wars are all about just creating money for big corporations. And, you know, so it just, you know, it's insane. And I think that hopefully we're getting to the point where we're like, you know, we're not just going to vote for a Democrat after a Republican does a shitty job, or a Republican after a Democrat does a shitty job. We're going to realize that, no, we need something new. We need something different. We need a third party. And I think that, you know, that's where progressives and libertarians, even though, people might not agree with one or the other. I think at least it's fresh, it's different, and or just an independent needs to come in and just kind of shake things up if they can get in a debate, which probably won't happen.
Well, what I want to see happen and what I think eventually will, the question is who will be the first, is that because the system for running for office is now pretty rigged, like you said, I think someone's going to run outside of that system and run on not collecting money. This is what I'm hoping will happen. Because there are celebrities that could do this right now in their own districts. But like, I think someone is going to say, okay, if my community wants me to go, I'll put my name on the ballot. I'll run on YouTube. I'll debate on Democracy Now! Because they are hosting debates on the internet. Because like that's how Gary Johnson and Jill Stein were able to participate in the debate, because Jill Stein was literally tied to a chair when she showed up and tried to debate in 2012. That is insane. But I think that because the internet allows us to communicate with each other, and so many of us, especially like our generation and younger, we are very well aware of the fact that the Democrats and the Republicans have really rigged the system in their own favor. You either get one or the other, and it's so hard for anyone else to get in. And I actually don't even think a third party is the answer, because that one will just get big and then we'll have the big three, Yeah. I just think that individuals at some point need to get clever and use this communication tool that we have to run and say, I am not collecting money, and that is why you should vote for me. Because now we have that ability. If you think about what all that money goes towards, it's going towards buying TV ads and radio ads. Now you don't need it. I don't have cable. Like, I just have C-SPAN and then the first, 7 channels in case there's an emergency. I don't watch it anymore. And I know so many people that don't have cable anymore. We're not the TV generation. That was our parents. We're the internet generation. And so we have conversations like this that are happening. And the problem that I see in Congress is that the old generation are still the ones that are stepping up and running. And until we get involved in an actual way and be willing to go and be willing to try, I don't see how we expect anything to change when we're entrusting our parents still to run this country. I turn 33 tomorrow. It's time. I'm an adult, So I would like to see, one of my dreams, and I know it's never going to happen, but I think that Joe Rogan, if he just paid the $1,700, I believe in California it costs, $1,700. You put your name on the ballot in the primary. People would show up in droves to get him onto the real ballot, and I think he could absolutely win.
Oh, he could. His following is unbelievable. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast. Was I just had Eddie Bravo on my last podcast. It's just
nice.
It's I'm a huge fan, but the thing is too is that I'm not sure.
Wouldn't you trust him to be your representative because you know him so well?
Well, yeah, but I don't think, like you said, I don't think he'll ever do it, because obviously he's had people on his show tell him you should run, and he'll be like, I'm too busy, not gonna happen. But I do think that maybe not a Joe Rogan, but a Joe Rogan fan of the podcast. Somebody who grew up in our generation and is open to these new ideas and influenced by your show, my show, Rogan's show, and all these great people out there who are sparking these conversations, sparking thought, telling us to be open-minded. Don't be caught up in this liberal conservative bullshit. Don't be caught up in skin color. Don't be caught up in, I'm pro-cops, I'm anti-cops, and all this stuff that separates us, and question what we believe, why we believe it, who we are, and all these things, and it's going to make us a better person. And I think that, we can all indirectly possibly affect the next, great politician by listening to our work. And I remember we're working next to UMass Amherst, because I'm from Massachusetts, and I remember driving through campus and all these kids, walking around with headphones and stuff like that. And I was just thinking, I'm like, I wonder if any of them are listening to podcasts. And I wonder how much, of what they're listening to, if they are listening to podcasts, is influencing who they're going to become in their views on life and the world around them, the way that podcasts have done that for me, and documentaries and books and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, that kid could be the next president. That kid could be the next president. Any of these kids could be the next, could be somebody really important that can really influence the world. And of course, before you become this person who influences the world, before you become Obama or before you become Ron Paul or whoever, first, you're a young kid who's taking in influences and taking in, books and documentaries and Our Generation podcast, and what you're listening to is influencing who you're going to become. So even if Rogan doesn't run, what his podcast is doing is influencing a generation to question everything and to look at things differently, and that is a huge impact. And so I think indirectly he doesn't even have to run to really create a great new politician. And I'm curious to see what the next, what our generations of politicians are going to look like, and what their point of view is, and if we're going to have this stupid liberal Democrat Republican bullshit, or if we're going to have more open-minded people and do that and maybe change the world. Because I think that we're getting to the point where something has to change. And I think with the access to information, there are still people out there like that Twitter dude who are convinced of stupid shit. But most of us can just Google stuff and find out, like, holy shit, like, it's on Wikipedia that the U.S. has, influenced political outcomes in so many other countries. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is history, So it's just, I think with so much access to information, we can't be lied to like we used to. We can't be bullshitted the way we were before. And I just think it's gonna create a change, to consciousness and all that stuff. I just don't know what exactly is that outcome and what it's gonna cause. But I'm kind of glass half full, with our generation. I think that and there's a reason why so little of our generation voted the last elections, and there's why so many of us don't vote. And I know that you think that voting is we should vote. My opinion's a little different. I think that if I had a politician that I really believed in, I would vote. I just think picking the worst of two, I'm sure what you've heard, picking the worst of two evils is still picking evil. But and you can expand on that if you like.
I like you, Ricky. I don't want to have to yell at you right now.
So you truly believe that if for this presidential election, this last election, you have Obama, for a second term, which he
let's stay away from the presidential election.
Okay, so we agree that. Okay, so I think you're right,
because we've already lost it.
Yeah.
Because Jill Stein was tied to a fucking chair, I think we know that there's a top two. We get a Democrat, we get a Republican, that's all we get. When it comes to Congress, though, we just had an opportunity to pick our Congress. And the only one that I've looked up is the age bracket under 30. 21.5% of them showed up. And that is the largest age bracket that we have in this country. Imagine if that was flipped and if 80% of them showed up. The Republicans would not have won, because young people they're generally not Republican, like they always say that there was some stupid phrase that you're liberal when you're a kid and then you're conservative when you're older, and you actually earn a living. And I think that's total horseshit, but it kind of is true that younger people vote blue and that older people vote red. And the blue people are sitting at home. We had 80% of them sit out the election. How can they possibly expect to get a good Congress when they're allowing the old people who show up to pick it for them? It's the most frustrating thing in the world. And the thing is that I talk to so many smart young people who know all the stuff that we're talking about. They read the same books. They watch the same documentaries. They know all the same problems that we do. And the one thing that they can do to actually change it is to show up once every 2 years and vote. And they won't do it. And they think that it's like something to be proud of because they don't want to participate in a corrupt system or whatever. It's total bullshit, because the system is corrupt because we are allowing people that are corrupt to run it. If you have two options, you do have to pick the best of the two. And if you have shitty options, then the next time you need to put yourself on the ballot. That's the thing. Like, there's very few people that I've talked to that are willing to actually put themselves out there and go, or at least try. Like, I know that I'm probably going to lose, but at the end of this year, my podcast is going to start focusing on what it takes to get my name on the ballot in California. Because if I'm going to do this, I might as well volunteer to go. I'm not going to collect money. I'm not going to campaign. I'm already, if you want to know who I am, I have 94 episodes where you can find out and you know exactly where I stand. And anybody can do what I do. Now, I'm not saying that people should quit their jobs and, be basically poor for a few years and read all the bills. That's crazy. But anyone can start a YouTube page and just saying, this is who I am. This is how I feel about the issues. This is what I would do if elected. And I am the candidate who's not taking the cash. So here you have this person in Congress right now who's taking millions, and then you have me. I am your neighbor, and I am pissed off, and I've read the things that you read, and I know the things that you do, or I know the things that you know, and I will go to Congress, and I will fight for you. And you can do that on YouTube. Anyone can do that on YouTube. We need 435 people to put their names on the ballots, one in every district, and then you have someone to vote for. But we have this double problem. We have the fact that people are proud non-voters, which makes me crazy, and we don't have people putting their names on the ballots. And it's a state-by-state thing. Some states are very difficult. I am unfortunately in California, which is one of the top 2 most difficult states now to get our names on the ballot. But in Oklahoma, you need 25 signatures. Texas, you need 500. That's nothing. I could do 500 in one Saturday. Not a problem. So there are plenty of avenues for people just like you and me who are pissed off and who are young and don't want to play the money game to get their names on the ballots and give themselves and their neighbors another option. And so that's the idea I'm going to try and spread.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Sorry to get all
No, it's okay.
and yelling at you.
No. I love the passion. I think that's what makes our generation special, because I think we are passionate about the things that, that bother us and the things that we see fucked up in the world. I mean, that's the reason why you do what you do. That's the reason I do what I do. I mean, I love having comedians on and people that are fun to talk to, but I also like having people like you on and talk about real issues. And that's kind of like my goal, is to kind of mix the two and hopefully expose this fan base to that fan base and vice versa. I had this guest on, Aaron Franz, and he was talking about, how that's one of the things he likes about my podcast, is that I had the amazing Jonathan on one show, and then I could have, James Corbett on the next show, or Jack Abramoff. And, if somebody subscribes because they think I'm going to have comedians, they might run into something political that might open their eyes or get their attention. So it's, I think that, I think it's important. I think you're right. I think especially we kind of don't take in consideration when we say vote, like, small town politics and small town, you can start locally and really make a difference. I think that's where you can really make a huge difference, is locally in your town, in your city, in your state. And then, and hopefully it works its way up. But I definitely think president wise, yeah, that's a joke. But I definitely think locally we can make a difference. And these decisions affect our lives. And I think that's the thing. Like, so many people say, oh, well, I don't want to talk about politics or whatever. This, and I'm like, I know you don't care about politics, but guess what? Politics cares about you. They care about, it affects how much money comes out of your paycheck. It affects, where your money's going. It affects so many, what you can drink, what you can eat, what you can't, what's in your food, what's not in your food. Like, it affects so many aspects of our lives that, to just be, to say ignorance is bliss and just move on with our lives and just let the system do what it may is insanity. I think that, we should care. And that's why one thing that I've noticed a lot too with like mothers, like they're big into like the GMO debate. They're huge into the vaccine debate. And I think it's because even if you don't give a shit about these things before you have a child, a lot of times, sometimes it takes a child for you to realize, like, holy shit, I didn't care what I was putting in my body, but I care what's going in his body or her body, because they don't have a choice, and I'm the one, feeding them, so I'm responsible. So I think that once we start looking at, okay, the future of this world and this planet and our policies and where our money's going. I mean, there's no reason why we can't have a fucking 3 or 4 day work week. I mean, we kept creating technology so we could make things faster and use less labor, but yet we're working more and more than we've ever worked. It's like, what the fuck went wrong, And so it's just, I think that we have to change the way we look at things. And I think that we can make a difference. I mean, that's why I called this podcast Ripple Effect. I think that every one of us, from you to me to anybody who's listening, even if it's just sparking the conversation, even if it's just having this conversation with zero outcome besides just putting these ideas and out there and talking about it, I think that changes a lot. And I think that can change a lot indirectly. I've talked to people where, you see, they feel, or they seem like they're not engaged in the conversation, and then like 2 months later, they're like, remember that thing you said? No. They're like, oh, I checked out that book, or I checked out the documentary. Oh, it's really interesting. And I'm like, holy shit, you were listening, And all of a sudden, you're little by little molding people's opinions. And, we talked about it, an hour and a half ago. The first thing we talked about, even in a debate, sometimes you don't think you're getting through to somebody. But when they walk, it's no different than having a heated argument with your significant other. A lot of times you're not going to give in to the fact that they were right in that moment, but then when you're by yourself and you're looking back at it and you're reflecting, you might be like, holy shit, they kind of made a point, so sometimes we are indirectly making a difference and changing people's perspectives, and I think we're all a part of that. So I think it's a beautiful thing.
I do too. And what you were saying about like people don't like politics, I think politics is becoming, I think that word is kind of poison, because I think there's a giant difference between politics and government. Because what you see on TV, I don't know if it's CNN or MSNBC, but they call it the place for politics. And that's the place for people on the red side and the blue side to scream at each other. And then they look at polls and discuss, the next president. And like, I hate all of it. So everyone says that I'm the person, like in my personal life, like no one likes politics more than Jen, but I hate that shit. What I'm interested in is government, and government is the stuff that affects your life. That's what they take 30% of your paycheck on average, and they spend it on whatever they're spending it on. And the government is, if you're going to lose your job, the government is what's going to actually give you what you need to basically survive while you look for a next one. And the government's the thing that's making sure that your bridges don't fall down, like the one that fell down, like right there, right outside my window in 1989. Like I live in Oakland, our freeway fell down. And so like there's a lot of things about government that are incredibly important, and that's what I focus on. But when people think of politics, they think of that fight, and I don't like fighting with anyone. My goal, especially when I talk to someone that doesn't generally agree with me, is to find that thing we agree on and build on that. And when you think about politics, it's always a fight. It's always a campaign. It's always an election. And that, I think, is what our generation finds so gross. I think if we can get them interested in government, we have a lot better chance of getting them involved in it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You're right. There is a huge difference in, and I probably have used the word incorrectly myself, but yeah, there's a huge difference between, policy and government and politics. Politics is, like we said, it's theater. It's one from the blue side, one from the red side, and then they have their points and try to debate, and that's all it is just trying to win a debate, which is completely pointless, because, debating is a worthless skill, because you can lose a debate and still, make the most sense and make the most points and still lose a debate. Somebody being good at debating is to me, is just a worthless skill. And I'd rather just share ideas and then try to, and just bounce ideas off each other. So I think, it's important, but I think it's one of those things where we relate politics with government and policies, and all that stuff gets lumped in together, and nobody wants to talk about any of it. And it's just like, well, we don't have to talk about politics to talk about policies or bills that are passing or Congress or whatever, and government. We don't have to talk about, who's blue and who's red. We can just talk about what's this bill that's being passed, or where's our money being spent, and not have to talk about who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. So I think you make a really good point. I think that you can still talk about government and ignore the politics, because like you said, it's pointless and it's meaningless. It doesn't mean shit, and it doesn't change anything, and it's just they both already have their established sides. You meet somebody who's a Republican, and 99% of the time you already know everything about them. They're pro-guns, they're anti-abortion, they're whatever. Same thing with.
See, that's the assumption that I think we need to get away from, because of the fact that we're labeling ourselves. We assume we know everything about a Republican, but we don't. Like I was a Republican. I was labeled a Republican officially, unofficially, in every way for quite a while, and now no one would accuse me of being a Republican. No one would accuse me of being a Democrat if they really know me. But that's the thing, like you dismiss every person, you dismiss so much of what that person is right off the bat the minute that they label themselves.
But you said it yourself. Anybody who agrees 100% with one party, like they're delusional. It's you can't possibly, because they're not even consistent with their own views. You can't possibly agree with somebody, with one party on every aspect. And so if you meet somebody who says they're a Republican, it says to me that you agree, like if you agree with some things and not all things, you shouldn't be calling yourself a Republican. What you're saying is, I agree with this political, this Republican idea, but to me, it's like, if there's nothing wrong, like, just because I agree, people would say, and I say it, I'm more fiscal, conservative and more liberal, social liberal, and I think that's probably why a lot of young people are, you talked about it earlier, why a lot of young people are Democrats, because we agree with the social issues. And so I think that, but I would never put myself in one or the other. I wouldn't call myself a Republican or Democrat, because then you do get prejudged and people do have this interpretation of what your beliefs are. And so that's why I think that when somebody, if somebody says, I watch Fox News, then I kind of know who you are and where your beliefs are, but
pretty much.
Yeah. So, I mean, when somebody says, so I think that's probably the difference. Like, if somebody says, hey, I agree with these, Republican ideas or these Republican politicians or whatever, then, but don't say they're a Republican, I'll be a lot more open-minded to listening to them. But if they say I'm a Republican, then a lot of times when you see, and maybe it's just me because I'm used to seeing Republican debate Democrat, and like I said, you already know where they stand on every issue, and it's just completely pointless,
Well, yeah, there are those people that they're on Team Republican, or Team Democrat, and so they mold whatever they think to whatever the team is telling them to say. They literally get emails in the morning saying like, oh, this is what we think today, talking points memos, those are real. Ugh. And so, yeah, those people definitely exist. You're right. Like, that happens. But I think just as individuals, assuming that most of us don't want to be that, I mean, there might be people listening to this that go, oh, my God, I do that. I don't think people even realize when they're doing it. They feel like they want to be on this side, and it's definitely fun to feel like you have people that have your back, and it's become this like American versus American thing, and it's dangerous,
Yeah.
and you do it to yourself. And so it's like when you meet someone, you say, hi, I'm Jen, I'm a Republican. You are giving that person permission to prejudge you by labeling yourself. And I think that's just something, that's going to go away with our generation, because I'm finding it less and less the younger and younger the people are that I'm talking to. I think the baby boomer generation, right from Vietnam, they both picked sides and they're all about it. And we're seeing like they have control now. They control the media and they control the Congress. And I think that's why we're seeing this polarization. It's just this thing about our parents' generation that just never stopped. But I find that no matter how people label themselves in our generation, I can find something that we agree on, almost always. And we're much more interested in discussing individual policies. And like, I just find our generation, especially the generation after us, the younger people, give me all kinds of hope, because they see right through the bullshit. They know exactly what it is. So I think we'll eventually be fine. The only question is, who's the person that's going to figure out how to break this system, or not even break the system, but like win outside of it. And as soon as one person shows us the way, I think it's over. You know, all the gerrymandering, all the money, I think we're going to figure it out. But one person is going to be the first. It's just a matter of who.
Yeah, I agree. The thing I'm afraid of is the idea of another Cold War, or the economy collapsing way worse than it did, in 2008 or whenever the hell it was.
So I think it will.
Yeah,
actually.
well, I think it will too, because the dollar's backed by nothing. I mean, income equality keeps getting worse, and I mean, it's just we don't export anything. We export fucking Kardashians and Britney Spears. We don't, and it's just one of those things. The dollar's not backed by anything, and if eventually if countries say, hey, we're not going to use the dollar as world currency for the petrodollar or whatever, then what's going to happen? I mean, a lot of people believe that's why we invaded Iraq. People believe that, that's why we got involved in Libya, with Gaddafi wanting to create his own currency. And so it just, who knows? But I feel like common sense is we keep, money keeps kind of funneling up to the top. We're not making any more money, but the price of everything keeps going up. So it obviously keeps funneling up to the top. Somebody's getting this money that we're spending, so what's going to happen as the middle class shrinks? Because if the middle class isn't investing in the economy by buying shit, because most of us, don't have enough money to invest or save. So what do? We buy shit to get us through the week. We, I buy the big screen TV at, Saturday. So then I can get through my week Monday through Friday, or I go to the Patriots game or whatever to kind of, give me something to look forward to. And then as we keep running out of money to spend, I mean, the economy is eventually going to collapse. And I just hope we kind of get it together before we do start a war with Russia, or or we end up having the dollar collapse or something like that. And so I just kind of cross my fingers and hope that I do think something, if we can keep it together for that long, I do think that our generation is going to be, will change things the same way that like there's protesters are in Vietnam and stuff like that. I think that with the power of the internet, I mean, they didn't have internet back then. They had to actually rally people together by knocking on doors and talking to each other and calling each other or whatever. Like, we have the internet. We can rally people together a lot quicker, a lot faster. I mean, obviously in Egypt and other places where there was revolutions, they called them the internet revolutions because, we saw the power of the internet of getting people together. And I think we can do that. But I just hope that it's before we kind of just self-destruct.
Unfortunately, I think it'll be after.
Really?
Because this economy is built on nothing. And unfortunately, we have allowed the things that we used to make and produce, like you said, we make nothing. But the danger in that is that we don't have anything. So it's like, if the rest of the world, if the economy does crash, like, how do we be self-sustainable when our most basic stuff comes to us from China? Like, I was looking at my clothes. Almost all of it comes from other countries. I wouldn't know how, like, where's the closest shoemaker? We don't have shoemakers, like, there's so many things that we don't even know how to produce because we get it from other places now. And this economy, I mean, like I told you, that bill, I mean, they're already setting the stage for the next crash. And the stock market is as high as it's ever been, but we're still, like, I haven't gotten any pay increases, and I don't know anyone who has. So yeah, I think I don't know. I hate to be the one to like be all downer. Like, I'm generally optimistic, but I think the big crash is still ahead of us, because all we did was reinflate the bubbles that popped in 2008, and we made the big banks even bigger because we allowed, like, Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch, and Too Big to Fail got even larger, and they're still doing the same type of stuff that they were before. And then when it comes to like geopolitical things, there's going to be a backlash for what we're doing. You don't get to just invade countries and not expect other countries to do something about it. Like, I know that the theory is that if countries trade together, then they don't have any problems, but I don't think that history actually proves that to be true. I think at a certain point, like, they just stop trading and say, oh, we've had enough of your shit, so we're going to make it ourselves, especially if you're China, because they make everything, and they stop putting up with us. It would be very easy for the rest of the world to just stop using the dollar, do it right away, do it in collusion, and we're in big, big trouble. And honestly, I can't say it's completely undeserved. I feel pretty guilty about the way that we've behaved. So, yeah, I think that we're living in the age of consequences for decisions that were made by people that came before us. And the question is, when it happens, what is our generation going to do about it? And what I think is really cool about us is we're already on board with energy efficiency and clean energy, and with living local and living sustainably, and all of these things that our generation stands for are the solutions to the problems that we're about to have. So I'm not necessarily afraid of this big crash, to tell you the truth. The only thing that I'm afraid of is when it happens, if these are the same people that are in power, if none of us have managed to get our way into the federal government, then they're just going to reinflate the bubbles. They're going to rebuild the same bad system, and they're going to control us using this spying network that they've set up and this giant military that they've built and that they've controlled. And that's what kind of scares me, is that I don't want to see us get to the point that the United States is a military state, is a actual police state where we are controlled in that way. And that's why I feel like sooner than later, we need to get some of us into Congress. I want to have at least a few people calling the shots when the shit hits the fan, which It's just going to.
Yeah, that spying thing is a real thing. I mean, there's a great documentary. It was a Frontline documentary that I watched a while ago, but now it's on Netflix called The United States of Secrets.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And so
I've watched it 3 times.
Yeah, that's crazy because
really
it's a long.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, there's just so much in there that I want to like get in my brain, you know?
Yeah, when you watch,
go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. When you watch something like that, yeah, it definitely takes like more than one view to kind of consume all that information. But the thing is, anybody who hasn't watched it, please watch it because it's just mind blowing. Just the laws that were broken and the justifications they used for it. And but I just watched. I don't know if you paid attention to like the new show that RT. I kind of replaced Breaking the Set, watching the Hawks, and they just did a story on New York. I think it was New York that they have. They're basically recording. They're like sensors or something like that can record gunshots. And they put like these recorders in the city where supposedly there's like the most gun violence, and they're recording basically everything, listening for gunshots, and you don't know where they are, you don't know what streets they're on, how sensitive they are, but apparently they can hear people having conversations. So basically, there's no such thing as privacy, and so they're listening to all their conversations, and the justification is so they can pick up on a gunshot, which. Who knows? It could be backfire from a car. It could be whatever noise that might sound like a gunshot. Now you have police coming to a event that didn't happen and wasting their time, when they could be somewhere else. So it's like this whole thing is ridiculous. And it's just like, I wonder how much of it is us just becoming...
even if that's even what it's for.
Yeah, exactly.
They use our fear of guns and violence to be able to spy on 2 people that are standing on a sidewalk, like we don't know what they're using it for.
Oh yeah, and that documentary, United States of Secrets, is perfect because what they were telling us why they were doing these things, and then the obvious reasons why they were doing it were 2 completely different things. They were basically throwing the Constitution out the window, and they're telling us it was for our safety, but obviously they were going to such extreme extents to spy on us that it couldn't be because of our safety, because obviously they haven't proved that it was making us any safer in the first place. And so and a lot of these programs were happening even before 9/11 regardless. So yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It sucks to end this. I'm like thinking to end this podcast, and I'm like, but we're ending it on such a negative topic.
I know, it's such a downer, but that's the thing, like we haven't lost yet. Like we still do have, I do think we've lost the presidency, which is why it makes me crazy that for the next 2 years, not everyone, but plenty of people that want to talk politics, they're just going to talk about the presidential election. And it's a waste of time, but we still have the power to control our Congress, especially the House of Representatives. That one's wild. The districts are smaller. That one you can actually break into. And obviously state and local politics, you can get into those. But if we're talking about the federal government here, the biggie, the House of Representatives is where I lay all my hope in, because regular people have snuck in. That whole Tea Party wave, it was corrupted by Freedom Works and the Koch brothers, and those buses full of people don't show up when it's actually like grassroots, but whatever. The point is that people like Martha Roby, who really is like a soccer mom, she's in Congress. We have dentists, we have gynecologists that are in the House of Representatives. So podcasters can get in and teachers can get in, and we haven't lost everything yet, and then, they say that in a crisis, the things that are implemented are the ideas that are laying around, and we're crafting those ideas right now. We can demand what we want when the crash happens if we don't freak out and actually keep our wits together. I'm actually really hopeful, despite the fact that I think things are going to get worse before they get better. But I do think that it will get better. I just refuse to believe that they won't.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that the world of podcasting and documentaries and everybody who's just sparking these conversations, I think that we're all doing our part, and I'm sure just like yourself, I've gotten multiple emails and I also run into people who I didn't know listen to this show and tell me about some show they listen to. So people are listening, and people are inspired, and people are taking this stuff in. And and I know you get donations and subscribers, and most people who listen to your show probably don't donate, don't subscribe. And so you just look at the amount of people who listen, who you are getting to, and you are planting that seed and changing their perspective. And it just, you have to think that it's this ripple effect of they're going to, what they're hearing on your show, it's going to be sparked in a conversation at the bar, while having a drink. And
I hope so.
Yeah. and it's going to continue. And then, they're going to share some information with a friend, and, they're going to have that conversation or a similar conversation with another friend. And then, we can all make a difference. And that's why I think that we've been told that, we can't make a difference. And I've been told when I started this podcast, just like, you were told, that what the fuck am I doing it for? Like, I'm not going to make a difference. I'm not going to change anything. And I'm not, and I don't know what I have changed or any difference I have made, but I feel good knowing that I'm trying, and I feel even better when I do hear even one, for lack of a better word, success story, somebody who actually heard this and it changed their perspective. And even if I'm only changing the perspective of one or two people, to me, it's worth it. And because one, it's fun, and two, if I can feel good about what I'm doing and do something that's enjoyable and get to meet cool people and smart people and have conversations, then why not?
Yeah. And I feel like even if you're not ready to, or ever going to start a podcast or do something like this, like everyone has an opportunity to do this type of thing because the internet allows us to share information so freely. So, I mean, you can have a Twitter account and share good articles. I mean, I'm obsessed with Twitter. It's my favorite thing. Or you can post things that interest you on Facebook. That's how you know people from high school, and that's how you can you never know what you put out there that's actually going to like get through to someone. It might mean nothing to you, but it might mean a lot to them. You never know what it's going to be. And just by sharing, just by putting it out there, whatever it is that fascinates you, like, it's definitely a way for us to make things better during most of the days when we're not available to go, or when it's not voting day, like that's definitely like the number one thing that people can do. But even politically, you can volunteer if you do have a congressman that you're down with, or if you hear about a bill or anything that goes on in the government, you need to call your senators and your congressman. I do it all the time. I mean, it's staffers that answer the phone. They're very nice. You just give them your opinion. They don't want to talk to you. It only takes like under a minute. And they say, okay, thank you for your opinion. Nice to talk to you. Bye. And then they hang up. It's super easy, but then they write it down. And what they do is they take a poll. It's like this many people called and said they're for this. This many people called and said they're against it. And that is what people judge how they're going to go forward on a bill on. It freaks out these people in Congress, because one thing that we have to remember, all the money, all of it is for influencing our vote. So when they hear that I am voting based on this, it freaks them out, because no amount of money can change the fact that if people show up and vote for the other guy, you're out of a job. So it's like we have a tremendous amount of power, especially with the ability to share information, every single one of us, not just those of us with podcasts. And the sooner we figure that out, the better. Yeah,
definitely. And so thank you so much for being on. We didn't talk about.
It was so nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about last time. That was really unlike me, but it was obviously with a pregnant wife. There's a lot going on, and then I think
you guys were having a baby. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm like, can you hold on for like one day, please? But no, yeah, it was awesome, and it was awesome to be a father, and and be able to redo this and have this conversation. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about, but I love the fact that we didn't talk about it, because I like the flow of just having these conversations and not agreeing on absolutely everything. And those are the best conversations, and so thank you so much. Where can people get your podcast? Obviously, if you're listening to this, you probably know where you can get podcasts, but you have a website, you have a podcast, you have a Twitter account, so people can get all that.
I do. The podcast is called Congressional Dish, and I actually have a free app available for both iPhone and Android. So that's probably the best way to do it. But then you can also get it through iTunes, Stitcher, all those different locations, and then also through congressionaldish.com. And on congressionaldish.com is where I have all the show notes. So it's like, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, I source everything, and I link to all the bills and the parts of the bills. It automatically scrolls to whatever I'm talking about, so the show notes are really valuable. And then on Twitter, you can find me at Jen Briney, Briney. So,
beautiful.
And that's my favorite social media. If you want to talk to me, that's where you find me.
Yeah, definitely check it out. And like you said, I think one thing that you said, and I want to stress again because it's so important, even if it's as simple as retweeting one of Jen's tweets, or just sharing a interesting article, we can all really make a difference. I know plenty of people who are a fan of my show or are a fan of other shows who never retweet or share stuff. And I'm always like, dude, if you like that show, retweet it, like share it, but like it, do something, like, because one of your friends or somebody who follows you might expose one more person to it, So I think that when you read an article, and I'm guilty of it, I'll read something that's interesting or watch something that's interesting, and then I never go through the work of, sharing it with people who follow me or my friends on Facebook. So, I think that we should do that, because a lot of times when you do it, sometimes you are exposing some interesting article or news that those people possibly aren't getting. And so definitely do that. It's a small task, and it can make a difference. So let's continue making a difference, little tweets at a time.
I like it. We ended on a positive note.
Yes, we did.
It was tough to get there, but we did it.
Thanks, Jen. Hey, I'll have you on again, because definitely interested to know you're actually going to get your hands dirty and get in politics and run, and that's awesome, man. I mean, I think, and it's ballsy, because it's not an easy thing to do, and it's a lot of work, but that's... Well,
I'm going to put my name on the ballot. That's what I'm going to do. And so if people want to vote for me in my district, they can't say that they didn't have that option. That's pretty much. And it's cool because Berkeley's in my district, UC Berkeley. So I'm hoping to just kind of go there, and, it's the college students that'll get someone like me in, So I'm going to try and collect the signatures. And if I can't, I'll pay the rest of it. And the problem with California is they've rigged the system now to where the top 2 candidates that win in the primaries, those are the only people that can make it onto the general election ballot for the House. And so we have 53 districts here in California, and out of all those districts, we had 4 people that weren't Democrats or Republicans.
Wow.
So I have to do all this work for the primary, which is an election no one shows up for. But my hope is if I can go to UC Berkeley and get a lot of those people to register here where they live now, because the low turnout is, proven with primaries, maybe we can get a higher turnout with my young people, and I'll have a chance at the general election. So it's going to be really hard for me. But one of the goals of Congressional Dish is I'm going to do it. I'm going to do an episode on all 50 states and tell people, rank them from the easiest to the hardest. And then hopefully, because my audience is big enough now that I think I do have people in every state, and tell them, if you're in one of these easy states, go, get the 25 signatures and put yourself on it, because there's some states where they don't limit the number of people that can be on the ballot. And that's where I get a lot of hope from. That's where that person who makes it in without the money, that's how they're going to do it. So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I wish you good luck with that, and I'll keep
Thank
listening,
you.
and I hope your podcast keeps expanding, because like I said, I think that there's a lot of conversation podcasts out there, but you definitely bring information that you're not getting anywhere else, and I think you break it down in a way that even a dumbass like myself who doesn't understand fully the whole political system and stuff, we can understand. And I think the idea of like bills sounds scary, but the way you explain it and stuff like that, it's not scary at all. It's easy to understand, and really you do all the hard work. We just have to listen. So.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you feel that way, because I work really hard on trying to make this stuff understandable. So
yeah, definitely. Well, okay, Jen.
Cool.
Thanks again. I'm glad we could do this, and we'll keep in touch. And I'll get you
Sounds
that.
great.
I'll get you that email.
Yes, please do. I'm very excited.
Thanks, Jen. Take care.
Thanks, Ricky. Bye.
Bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.